May this reading relax your mind and awaken your heart. Today we start the second chapter of the third act. We'll dive right into it. From Goa, I sailed back to Bombay and I began my return journey to the Himalayas. I traveled by train to Delhi and then northwest to the town of Pathankot, or maybe it's pronounced Pathankot. You'll have to tell me. Near the border of Jammu and Kashmir. From there I journeyed east on the back of a truck to the Himalayan town of Dharmasala in Himachal Pradesh. Many Indian city names or geography names. Summer was approaching and the forest was bursting with blooming flowers of orange, yellow, violet, and white. Huge ancient trees were cloaked in shining green leaves, and a constant buzz of wildlife energized the atmosphere. High on a mountain range above Dharmasala reigned Mikliad Ganja, a Tibetan refugee camp and home to the Dalai Lama of Tibet. In preparation for my pilgrimage to his mountaintop monastery, I read a book he had written entitled My Land and My People. I learned that Lamo Dhondrub was born in 1935 in a simple Tibetan house made of stone and mud to a family of poor farmers. A search party of exalted monks was directed to this house of the regent of Tibet, who had a vision revealing that this was the place where the next Dalai Lama had been born. When the child was only 2, they came to the house in the guise of travelers seeking refuge. Around one monk's neck hung the beads of the previous Dalai Lama, which the child grabbed, claiming them to be his own. After several visits and consequent tests, the committee concluded it had found the 14th incarnation of Chendrazig. I'm sure I could pronounce that better. The Bodhisattva of compassion, who is believed to be the guide of the Tibetan people spiritually and politically by reincarnating in each generation as the Dalai Lama. The boy was conveyed to the monastery of Lhasa, where he was groomed to be the head of state and spiritual leader of a nation. During the childhood years of his reign, Tibet flourished, but in 1950, the Chinese military invaded, and by 1959, the nation was torn by bitter agitation and violence. On the insistence of his people, who feared for his life, he had to flee from his beloved homeland. The Dalai Lama prayed in the temple of Lord Buddha and offered a shawl of white silk at the altar as a symbol of farewell with the intent to return. With a heavy heart, he shed his monk robes, and in the guise of a soldier, he escaped the palace in the dark of night. Through heavy snow, torrential rains, and bitter cold, he and his party trekked across the rugged mountains of Tibet like fugitives. All the while, his heart was breaking at the plight of his people. Struck by disease, exhaustion, and what he referred to as unhappiness deeper than I can express, he crossed the border into India. Gripped by this amazing story of exile, fate, and overcoming hardship, I was compelled to see the place where the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism had made his new home. By the time I arrived in 1971, Mikliad Ganja, nestled in the high forested mountains and steep valleys of the Himalayas, looked like a little Tibet. The refugees dressed in their traditional clothes and constructed wooden or brick buildings in the Tibetan style of architecture with dragons and other mythical beings carved or painted in rich colors onto their pillars and arches. Yaks grazed on the hillsides, and a few scattered Western pilgrims found secluded places to meditate. Just as in Tibet, many of the men were Buddhist monks. In the center of the village, the faithful circumambulated a large rectangular area surrounded by prayer wheels, all the while spinning the wheels and chanting the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. I knew from my reading that the Tibetan Buddhists believed this mantra invoked the blessings of Chendrazig, the embodiment of compassion, and that all the teachings of Buddha were contained within it. The people in McLeod, it's probably not pronounced McLeod, it's probably something like McLeod. McLeod Ganja were incredibly friendly. Growing with smiles, they welcomed me wherever I went. Despite the hardships they had endured, and despite being refugees in a foreign land, they seemed at peace. I saw no beggars or cheaters among them. Everyone looked content. One family welcomed me into their small home and served me a Tibetan noodle soup called thupka, a traditional tea made with yak's butter and salt. This tea was especially effective at keeping a person warm during the cold Himalayan nights. My heart was so charmed by the people here that I often spent hours just watching them perform their daily chores as they grinned at me from ear to ear. Not far from the Dalai Lama's house stood the temple of a magnificent deity of the Buddha sitting in the lotus posture. Both the monks and the common people worshipped this golden form of Buddha by offering incense, bells, lamps, and gifts. The puja, or worship ceremony, fascinated me. The monks sat in two lines facing one another with the Buddha in the center. They read from scriptures inscribed on sheaves of unbound parchment leaves. Each leaf was placed on top of the previous as they recited ancient prayers in unison. At auspicious intervals, some monks blew long trumpet-like horns, others rang ritualistic bells, and others struck large gongs with wooden mallets and beat upon huge drums with sticks. As the vibration reached its crescendo, a high priest ceremoniously raised a scepter crafted of intricately molded brass. This dorje was a transceiver of spiritual energy. Decorating the walls of the temple were artworks called tantras, painted in vibrant colors designed to aid enlightenment by depicting history and symbolism of Buddhism. The fragrance of burning oil lamps and sweet incense further lifted my mind as I sat with the monks meditating and chanting mantras. One early morning, while I was meditating in the temple, a tall, elderly lama with a shaved head, maroon robes, and a strand of wooden beads draped around his neck sat beside me. He said that he had been observing me for several days, and asked if I would like to ask any questions. We spent a couple hours of each day together. On one very special afternoon, he invited me to join him for a personal audience with the Dalai Lama. The home of the Dalai Lama rested on a wooden hill surrounded by armed Indian military guards who, because he was under constant threat of death, were stationed for his protection. Passing through security, I was ushered into a room where brightly colored paintings of Buddha and the great bodhisattvas decorated the walls. A beautiful metal deity of Buddha sat on an altar. decorated with flowers, brass lamps, bells, and other items of worship. Cedar-scented incense perfumed the air. Minutes later, a door opened, and the Dalai Lama glanced toward me, eyes sparkling with joy behind his brown-rimmed glasses. His large head was shaven, and he had a square face, low rounded nose, and draped a maroon robe over a bright golden monk's shirt. Beaming a contagious smile, he sprinted across the room to greet me. Laughing aloud, he tightly gripped both my hands and shook them again and again. His eyes twinkled with glee as he spoke in a hearty voice. "You have come from far away. I welcome you." I wondered, was there a picture of the Dalai Lama at the beginning of this book, in the picture section, just to give you some visual? Yes, there's a picture of them together, in fact. Here. You can see the Dalai Lama. And then here's our protagonist, our author. Oops, I moved my camera. We sat on 2 chairs across from one another. With a childlike curiosity, he asked me about my life in America and why I had chosen the life of a sadhu. As I told my story, he listened to every word with rapt attention and concern. Whenever there was a trace of humor in my tale, his whole body shook with laughter, and he clapped his hands together. We spoke for perhaps a half hour when I asked him about the condition of his people in Tibet. A wave of introspection then swept across his face, and tears welled in his eyes. In the silence that now surrounded us, he whispered, "When I was a boy, my nation enjoyed freedom. We were a happy and united people, and our spirituality was flourishing." He paused for a long moment. In sober silence, he lifted up a teapot to offer me a cup of Tibetan tea. I watched as the steaming tea poured from the spout into my cup. The Dalai Lama then returned the teapot to its place and lowered his head in deep thought, as if looking with his mind's eye and feeling in his heart the strife of his people across the Himalayan peaks in Tibet. He added tenderly, "We owe a great debt to India for providing shelter to thousands of our people." And that's something that still goes on today, if I might add, even about 50 years after the story is taking place. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that's happened between countries, is that one country practically took another country in for shelter, since Tibet is now an autonomous region of China. But there's a little Tibet in North India that is where the Dalai Lama, the leader of Tibet, continues to reside, and many of his people. The universal quality of religion, he went on, is compassion to other living beings. To sacrifice for the good of others is true dharma. Seeing the immense sacrifice he extended for his people, his words struck my heart. Meditation, study, and worship, he said, give us the inner strength to live as kind and enlightened beings. His message invoked introspection, and his personality inspired reverence, but his affection had made me feel to be his intimate friend. Smiling, the Dalai Lama graciously placed around my neck a white silken shawl embroidered with Tibetan mantras. "It is a tradition to offer this gift to all my special guests," he said. I felt undeserving of his time and kindness and bowed my head with gratitude. In his company, the virtue of selfless service was becoming more prominent in my mind. He was a person dedicated not only to his spiritual principles, but also to taking on the massive burden of serving the needs of his people who were either in exile or under subjugation. He had endured incomprehensible challenges and obstacles in his apparently hopeless struggle. Tolerating exile and threats, he served his people. In my mind, this is what the shawl represented. It was a special gift. On a forested mountainside, I took up residence in a cave that overlooked a steep valley. There I survived on a food called tsampa, a dry powder made of roasted barley. When water is added, it becomes like porridge. Tibetan monks taught me how to survive on tsampa, as it does not spoil. Having thus simplified my bodily needs, each day I was able to come down to Miklad Ganja to learn from the people there. Nights, I returned to my cave. One night as I lay on the rock floor, a gigantic spider crawled along the wall, just inches from my face. It moved its hairy black body slowly, lifting one leg at a time, until it disappeared into a hole about 6 inches from my face. As a small child, I had been terrified of spiders. Any time one entered our house, I would run away from it, crying for my mother to remove it. This cave-dwelling spider was the most ferocious I had ever seen. This is a test from God. I must overcome this fear, I thought. From that night on, the two of us respectfully shared the cave. From where I meditated, I noticed cobras occasionally slithering about in the forest. At times, I had other roommates as well. One night, a huge scorpion fell from the ceiling. Inches from me, it wagged its deadly stinger from side to side. At that moment, my only candle burned its last, and the cave became pitch black. I felt it unwise to move, and so sat motionless in the darkness for a long time. In this state, I recalled fatherly Kailash Baba and how he taught me the proper consciousness around snakes and scorpions. Breathing slowly, I prayed to God to help me overcome judgment, hatred, and fear. One morning in my cave, my mind drifted across continents and seas to my father in the Chicago suburb of Highland Park. Unsure about my own direction, I was nonetheless feeling that the greatest act of love I could offer him was to write a letter encouraging him to come closer to God in the way that would be most natural for him. With the conviction of youth, not yet knowing my own path, I wrote, "My beloved Father, I would like to ask something very dear of you. Much of the compassion that you have is reflected from my beloved Grandpa Bill." Oh, that's nice. I also have a Grandpa Bill. I believe that the root of his compassion was his all-embracing faith in the Hebrew religion. Grandpa implanted within you the seed of love for Judaism. Please nourish this seed with all sincerity to attain the inspiration of your faith and love for God. I feel that the sacred gift of meditation will give you great insight to reach the depths of Judaism. Hebrew, as well as the other great religions, can bring all of us closer to the Lord. Please carry on the inspiration of your father and forefathers. I believe this is what you truly want. Richard, Miklad Ganja, Dharamshala, Himachal Pradesh, India, May 1971. For the most part, on my quest throughout India, I had no companion with whom I could reveal my heart. My associates either spoke no English or were great, powerful sages far senior to me in age. At times, I was lonely, but I learned to relish loneliness as a way to cultivate my connection to God. Silent prayer became the medium through which I could pour out my thoughts and feelings. The serenity of meditation was my shelter from the restlessness of my mind and world around me. While reassuring my family about my welfare, I was often impelled to use these letters to open my heart, even to recipients who might find my words difficult to comprehend. Sometimes, too, I would reveal my heart onto a small writing pad. One sunny day, while sitting alone in the solitude of my mountain cave, I wrote the following, to no one. In the mind of a hermit, in troubled times, when a man is tired and weary, confused as to where he is going and what he has left to fall behind, he doesn't know whether to cling to or to let go forever of those things that still remain with him. Where to go for one who has forsaken friend and home? What to do for one who wanders alone in the wilderness of his own solitude? Should he break the walls that he has constructed around himself, or should he build them stronger and higher? He pleads, "O Lord, is there a guide who can show me the way to you? Where shall a homeless man reside who believes that home is not in this mortal world?" A reclusive mystic from Egypt lived a short distance from my cave. From time to time, we shared soul-searching talks. He had a dark, smooth complexion, large nose, thin lips, and an untrimmed goatee. His black, introspective eyes were so intense they glazed over as if looking into another world. Outwardly calm, his mind was always working to find another missing piece of wisdom in the puzzle of life. An Egyptian master of the oracle, a tarot-like science sometimes referred to as the Metu Neter, he offered one night to read my destiny. I agreed. Shuffling the deck and lining the cards into precise rows on a powder blue cloth in front of him, he commenced to enact a series of occult rituals from ancient Egypt. Then he guided me through an elaborate meditation that culminated in my selecting a card. Each brightly colored card was about 6 inches tall, 3 inches wide, and illustrated with mystical symbols and mythical figures. For a good half hour he concentrated on the configuration before he finally broke the silence. He slowly rose from his chair, put both hands on the table, and delivered his prophecy. Neither your mind nor intelligence have the power to discern the spiritual path you long to know. Very soon, however, the divine power will direct you. Like a leaf in the wind, you will be led to the path you must follow. It was as if the cards knew everything about me, and he was their mouthpiece. Placing his finger on a particular card, he fell silent. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You must persevere with patience. By a power beyond your own, you will recognize the very one you seek. Believe in this. It is your destiny. Your master will come to you." Thank you. That concludes the second chapter of the third act of the journey home. I welcome any insights that may have arisen whilst we read, and I look forward to continuing the story with you.